Okay, we are officially at 8:30 p.m. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. My name is Ron. I'm an alcoholic. How you all doing tonight? A couple quick announcements. We put the flyers, we taped them on the back wall back there. There's a picnic, an annual picnic here, Memorial Day picnic, Sunday, May 26th. It's a Pavilion 3 at Peace Valley Park. It's absolutely free. They'll have plenty of food there, but it's always nice to bring your own favorite dish and be a part of that. It's a good, fun fellowship on a Sunday. It goes on every year. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, that's important. What is the other thing? Oh, yeah. Every Monday night in here, 7:30 p.m., there's an Al-Anon ACOA meeting. If you have any family members or friends that are struggling with recovery, maybe in your life or outside that you run across, give it to them. The flyers are on the back. The best way to do with this picnic flyer and that Al-Anon flyer is to take a picture of it. I taped it in the back. Blab it your phone. It's really good to have. Our Facebook page, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown, carries not only all this information posted in there, but information from other groups going on every single night of the week in AA. So up and down the coast. So if you're bored in AA, just go on there. There's something every night of the week. It's pretty cool. If you have any events, if you have any flyers for anniversaries or anything that's going on, workshops, conventions, roundups, please bring it here and post it in that group. Be a part of that and be able to follow it. What else could I got to tell you? I think that's about it. Brian's going to come up here and chair the meeting. Have fun.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brian, and I am an alcoholic. This is a one-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday evening at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, 301 North Main Street, in Doylestown, PA, at 8:30. The business meeting for this group meets here every Saturday, 7 to 7:30 p.m. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teachings of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others may benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. Is there anyone that's new or from out of town that would like to introduce themselves by first name? Yes?
I'm Gianna.
Gianna, welcome.
My name is Flo. I'm visiting from Los Angeles, and I am an alcoholic.
Welcome.
Clay, alcoholic.
Clay, welcome.
I'm Maggie. I'm an alcoholic.
Maggie, welcome. In the back. Chris, welcome. Anybody else? Yes.
Rich, alcoholic, Annapolis.
Rich, welcome.
Richard, alcoholic, Marlton.
Richard, welcome. Get everybody? Okay. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with working knowledge of the 12 steps and that is willing to sponsor, please raise your hands. All right, so there you go. If you're new, those are your sponsors. Grab one of those people after the meeting. Are there any announcements for the good of AA? Nobody? Okay, a couple announcements from this group. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purchase of big books and CDs to help those who can't afford them can put donations in the jar on the back table marked Big Book and CD donations. If you would like a CD of any speaker, past or present, see me or Ron after the meeting. They are available free of charge. And with that, Maggie's going to come up here and she's going to read the preamble.
Hi, I'm Maggie. I'm an alcoholic. Okay, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are all self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. Okay, and I'm going to introduce Teresa, who's going to read the 12 steps.
Hi, I'm Teresa. I'm an alcoholic. The AA 12 Steps of Recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Now Brian's going to come back up to introduce our speaker.
Okay, it's a tradition, every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, we're going to pass the basket. There are no dues or fees, but we do have expenses. Your contributions help us to cover the cost of rent, big books, CDs, the refreshments in the back. So there's absolutely no smoking on church property. That's the church's policy. It's a beautiful facility we have here to have our meeting at, so if you could please just help us with that as you're coming and going from the premises. Greatly appreciated. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. And now to introduce our speaker for tonight, a very good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group, on loan to us from the Bowie Speaker Group of Bowie, Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Dave D.
Hey everyone, I'm Dave. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks for having me up here. It's great to be here with you. Thanks for the warm welcome. So we'll start off with a little bit of audience participation, because I like to have a sense of who I'm talking to. If you got a year or less, will you raise your hand for me? Okay. How about 5 to 1? How about over 5? Okay, good. That gives me a sense of, like, you know, I mean, I got a sobriety date. It's June 23rd, 1990. So I've been sober a while, right? And so I've got, about 9 years of drinking experience, almost 29 years of sober experience. And so in an hour, trying to figure out how much time do we spend on what parts, right? And what I'm going to do is, what the big book tells us to do in a general way, talk a little bit about what my life was like as a practicing alcoholic. What happened to get me here with you. An amazing life that I've been blessed to live for the last 28 plus years because I came. And so getting a sense of where folks are will help me kind of parse it out in a way that hopefully will give everyone in here a chance to maybe try to connect and identify. And regardless of what comes out of my mouth tonight, one thing I can guarantee you is that you all will help me, because when I get a chance to stand up here and tell my story, you allow me to 12-step myself. You allow me to walk through, the mess that I brought to you all, and the amazing life and the transformation that's happened here. So thank you for that. The best way I like to start is with a section out of Bill's story, because in this sort of short paragraph, it kind of describes the kind of drinker I was, and then kind of my experience in sobriety. So on page 11 in Bill's story, and this was kind of, it was a little baffling to me the first time I read the book. We were introduced to somebody in Bill's story who came in 12-step Bill. And now I thought Bill and Bob were the original guys. So I was always a little baffled about who is this guy that shows up in Bill's house and looks like he's 12-stepping. It looks like he's really kind of passing on, the message of hope to Bill. And it turns out, if some of you in here may or may not know, that this guy was a guy named Ebby Thatcher, right? And Ebby had gotten sober in something called the Oxford Group, which is kind of the predecessor to AA. And a lot of our influence came from the Oxford Group. And and Ebby was a drunk like Bill and knew Bill. And part of the Oxford Group principles was to actually try to reach out and help others. And Ebby knew Bill was a drunk, and he had come to try to tell Bill that there's hope, there's a way out, and it's a God-centered way out. So also, I'm going to tell you, you're going to hear a lot about God tonight because, quite frankly, that's through Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, the spiritual awakening that I've been blessed to have is what's kept me sober all this time. So here's Bill reflecting on the visit from Ebby. And this is Bill kind of looking back after Ebby came and saw him. And this is what Bill says. He said, "But my friend sat before me and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap of humanity to a level of life better than the best I've ever known." And if I could tell you my story in one sentence tonight, I'll tell you, I came here and I've been taken from the scrap heap of humanity. No hope. Nothing worthwhile, nothing redeemable about what I brought to you. And I've been given a level of life better than the best I've ever known. So June 22nd, 1990 was not a good day. I don't know how many of you all came in here, thinking you just wanted a little spiritual awakening, a little polish on your prayer and meditation. We're really, coming from an altruistic background where you really just wanted to do something to help others in the world. That was not my case. I was 22 years old. I'd been in and out of AA for 3.5 years. Not because AA didn't work, but because I was not willing to take the action that we need to take here if we're going to stay, at least in my experience. And, I came the first time I was 19 years old. I was taught well. I know not everybody who comes to these rooms has the experience of being taught well. And I was taught well. I was loved as a kid. I didn't have I didn't have the ideal upbringing. My dad got killed in Vietnam. I was raised by a single mom in the 70s. So there was some adversity, right? There were some things that weren't perfect in my life. And, but all in all, I look back now and I see how blessed I was to have so many amazing examples of how to be a fine human being around me and try to teach me those things. To try to teach me how to be a man of character and integrity and honesty, right? To try to teach me about hard work and that my word was my bond. And all those things were not just told to me, they were shown to me and some amazing examples of human beings who I got a chance to shape my life in the early years and who loved me more than words can ever express. And nonetheless, I grew up feeling like I didn't fit, and somewhere around 13 I took a drink, and my first sponsor, Tom F., who's no longer with us in body but is always with me in spirit, he used to say, he used to tag my alcoholism, and the way he described it, he'd say, Dave, I wasn't a problem drinker, I was an answer drinker, and he said, with about 1 drink, 2 drinks, he said I was a dancer. He said about 4 to 5 drinks, he said I was a singer. And he said with 10 drinks, I would solve global world problems, right? And I love when Tom would say that because really, for me, for what alcohol does for me, I'll let it do anything to me, And at 13 years old, about 24 ounces of Budweiser took me from a scared little 13-year-old, 5-foot-tall, 110-pound kid to a rock-solid leader of men, right? And if that happens to you in an instant, man, and I imagine something like that must have happened to some of you if you're still here, if you're coming here to AA, you don't forget it. And it wasn't like I started to hang out on the playground drinking every day after that, but what happened was that night I drank as much as I could. I went into something called a blackout. I woke up the next day not knowing where I was, all alone, covered in my own vomit, and I thought I can't wait to do that again. Right, and so every time I got a chance to drink, I drank like that, and so the frequency increased, the distance between blackout drunks got smaller, right? The impact of my drinking got greater, and by the time I'm 19 years old, I go from being I was the top male student in my graduating class. Now it was a crappy little public high school, but still I was a decent student, right? I was a varsity athlete in 3 sports. Yeah, I wasn't all state or anything, but I did get the letter, and I was a pretty good athlete, right? I was dating a, pretty little blonde cheerleader girlfriend. Yeah, she wasn't the prom queen, but hey, she was beautiful, right? And so on the outside, it seemed like, my life was looking pretty good. And a year after I graduated from that high school, I'm carrying guns, running the streets every day, drinking all the time, dealing drugs, and hurting the people that I love. Absolutely breaking the heart of the people that love me. And by then I had already tried to quit drinking a couple times. I mean, legitimately tried, like all my willpower. And I was already beginning to be baffled by the fact that I couldn't seem to quit. Because it seemed like there was other areas in my life where I'd just work harder, I'd try harder, whether it was sports or with grades or, any areas of my life. It seemed like if I really buckled down and really tried my best, man, and put my energy on it, I could achieve things I wanted to do. And I made up my mind with full determination that I wasn't going to drink anymore, man. And a day, a week, a month later, I'd be drinking again. And at 19 years old, I came home after a 3-4 day straight run and, stealing from the people that love me, and I could see the disgust and pain in their eyes, more broken promises, now I'm to the point where, I'm not only breaking the promises of the people who love me. I'm not going to do that again. I'll be home in a couple of hours, right? I promise I'm not going to hit you or steal from you or do whatever it was that I was doing to you, right? I started breaking the promises I made to myself. Those quiet promises that we make, right? That it's going to be different this time. That I've got to get it together. It's got to change, and like I know, that we broke those promises too, right? And after one of those 3-4 day runs, I came back and I pulled out the .357 Magnum I've been carrying around with me, and I pulled the hammer back and I stuck the barrel in my mouth, and I can still taste it. And I looked in the mirror, and I tried to avoid mirrors by this time. I'm 19 years old, right? I'm not even legal drinking age in the state of Maryland. And my life has become so unmanageable that I want to end it. In the big book, it talks about we come to a jumping off place where we wish for the end, where we can't imagine life with alcohol, and we can't imagine life without it. And a 19-year-old with a gun in my mouth, that's exactly where I was. I couldn't imagine continuing on the way I was. But damn, I could not imagine giving it up. And the thought came to me because I had been everywhere else. I'd grown up in the church. I knew a God. I just thought I was too bad for God at that point. I believed in a God. I just believed that I was too bad for him. I'd had judges try to help me by then. They didn't seem to do a very good job of getting me sober. I had people that I knew love could not get me sober. I had an amazing number of people who loved me. I remember I came home after one of those 3-4 day binges, and my 10-year-old niece had written me a letter asking me, please, 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 to stop drinking and killing myself. And I read that letter, and I could feel the emotion on the inside, and all I could do was crumple it up and throw it off to the side. She doesn't understand. But deep down inside, I knew that girl thought that, she could see what was happening, even at 10 years old. And she could hear what was going on and see that I had changed, and there was something terribly wrong with me. And she cared enough to write that note in her own handwriting, just with the hope that maybe, just maybe, it might change something for me. Right? That's the kind of things I was doing. And when that gun was in my mouth, because I had grown up in the church, because the judges had tried to help me, the psychiatrists had tried to help me, the counselors had tried to help me, right? The good teachers at school had tried to help me, right? The love of my family had tried to help me, and none of that was working. And anybody around me could see that, man, my life was in a spiral, was in a downward spiral that was not pulling up, and that I wasn't going to live very long. The only thing that I hadn't tried that had been suggested was Alcoholics Anonymous. And that had been suggested by a counselor for about 3 years by that time. First time I heard that, I was 16. And she gave me a couple books to read to see if I might be an alcoholic. One of them was a book called Under the Influence, which was sort of more the genetic and the physical characteristics of alcohol. And I read the book as a great intellectual, and I reported back to her and said, yes, well, I see I have some of the symptoms, some of the signs, but I am not, as of yet, an alcoholic. But when I get there, my grandfather, sober in AA, I will be sure to come to Alcoholics Anonymous, because I knew what you all were about. You had that, my grandfather had to beat up the whole drug and said one day at a time, right? But I knew that man did not take a drink ever. And when I was around 18, 19, and I really started thinking about this, he had been sober about 17 years at the time. And that was a long time. But even worse than that was I had gone fishing as a kid with a bunch of his AA buddies who were now sober like 30 and 40 years, right? That was an eternity. And I could not imagine not drinking or doing anything else, for the rest of my life at 17, 18, 19 years old. But there's something about having a gun barrel in your mouth that makes you reconsider things. I talked about looking in the mirror. When I kind of caught my eyes in the mirror, it's almost like I didn't recognize the young man that stared back at me. It's almost like I didn't know how I had become what I saw in that reflection. And I came to you the next day. And not my first meeting, but my second meeting, the guy who was my first sponsor, Tom F., was there. And and I'm 19, I'm young and strong and proud, right? I'm 30 pounds heavier than I am now, all muscle, right? And trying to be the big tough guy. I got a mullet, blonde mullet, right? Like a big muscle t-shirt on, man. I got some short shorts on, right? Big legs, and I'm trying to look tough and hard, right? And I walk into this meeting with all these old people, right? Look like I do now or older. And I'm like, I'm looking around, and the first thing that happens is this old woman, Virginia O., who seemed like she must have been 100. And I knew she was on some kind of prescription drug, because she just came running at me, man. And she reached up and she latched onto me and gave me a hug. She said, "Oh, honey, welcome." She said, "We're going to love you till you can love yourself." And I'm like pushing her away. "Get away from me, old crazy woman," And I know she's on something, that woman right there. And I sat down, and the meeting happened, and I'm a quick study. I'm a chameleon. Part of the street survival, I think, or I don't know, maybe it's alcoholics in general, is that kind of blending in with whatever group you're in. You come out of a blackout in a crack basement, and this literally happened. I came out of a blackout in a crack basement, and the guy's pointing a gun at me, and I'm pointing a gun at him. I'm thinking, all right, let's not panic here. Let's find out what's going on. It turns out we were comparing guns. But I just got there. So I wasn't sure whether to shoot him. I wasn't sure what to do. But you got to kind of figure out. And you got to blend in quick, right? Because there's a moment there where if I'd have played that cards the wrong way, somebody was going to die, right? And so I had experiences like that all the time. And so I come to AA, I'm just blending right in. You say, "Your name's so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic." I go, "Ooh." They're all looking at me. I go, "Yeah, my name's Dave, I'm an alcoholic." Like when you said, "Is anybody new or from out of town?" Like, yeah, I guess I'm supposed to say something, I'll say it. And somehow you all knew I was new. I don't know how you knew that, but you seemed to catch on to that. Because everybody kept looking at me. Like, anytime there was somebody new, somebody from out of town, and they're all looking at me, somebody need a sponsor, they're looking at me. And after the meeting, this old guy, Tom, comes and grabs me after. And he's a little Irish guy. He's about this big, and he's got white hair. And he's an Irish guy, right? So he looks like a typical Irish drunk, right? He's got that white hair. He's got a big red face, and he's got all the veins in his nose, like the good drunk, like he's drank a long time, and all the veins are busted. And he's wearing a bright green sport jacket. I found out later he was colorblind, and white pants and white shoes, And I thought, my God, this guy looks like a leprechaun. I don't know what's going on with him, right? But he was very excited, and he was very excited because he knew I was new. And what I found out, and I love about my first sponsor, and I do my best to try to follow in his footsteps today, is, man, he loved new people. And if he saw you were new in the meeting, man, he was going to make sure before you walked out of that door that you knew you were welcome, that you had his phone number, and that you knew he was willing to do anything he could to help you. And that was my first introduction to Tom. He ran up to me and, "Hi, my name's Tom, I'm an alcoholic," And the way my mind, my keen alcoholic mind works, right? It's trying to kill me, so it's always looking for ways out. And so I talked to Tom for a minute or two, and he had actually shared in the meeting I was in, so I kind of had a little bit of his story. I figured he was about 60 years old. He had been sober for about 10 years. That meant he was about 50 when he got sober. I'm 19 years old. I'm not legal drinking age in the state of Maryland, right? And Tom is telling me that if I'm an alcoholic and I keep drinking,
It'll get worse. And then he says this, and you'll die. And so what he was introducing me to was this idea that alcoholism is progressive and is fatal. And I don't know if anyone had told that to me in that direct of terms. But like I said, I'd already done the math. Tom got sober at 50. I'm 19. 50 minus 19 is 31. So I got like 31 years before I get to be as bad as old Tom is, and this thing might kill me, right? Now mind you, I got the gun in my mouth the night before, right? So it's not like, it's amazing how quickly the insanity returns, right? I literally have a gun in my mouth and finger on the trigger, like I'm really nearly there with this thing, like less than 24 hours. And yet somehow I think I've got like 30 years now, like within 24 hours later. I mean, that is the power and the insanity of the disease to me, right? And Tom turned out to be a prophet. What Tom told me later, I was 19, I was 22 when I got sober, is he said, Dave, he said, do you remember that conversation we had the first night I met you? And I said, yeah, most of it, Tom. He said, do you remember when I told you that, if you're an alcoholic and you keep drinking, it'll get worse and you'll die? And I said, yeah, Tom, I remember that. He said, there's one word I wish I would have added that night when I talked to you. And I said, what's that, Tom? He said, soon. He said, soon. He said, a lot of young drunks like you, especially when I could see the pride and the ego in you. He said, a lot of you guys don't live to be old drunks. And that started 3.5 years in and out of AA, June 22nd, 1990. Man, I'm at the run of, I started from, let me just say this, I started from thinking I wasn't as bad as you poor old broken up drunks in AA when I walked in at 19. Now, like I said, I got the gun in my mouth the night before, right? So there's a lot of insanity in that right there. And by the time I came to you in June 23rd, 1990, I was absolutely convinced that somehow I'm broken in a way, and I'm hopeless in a way that you all aren't. That whatever it is that you have, I'm too broken to get. I'm too alcoholic, I'm too crazy, I'm too schizophrenic, I'm too something. Because I've been coming in and out of these rooms for 3.5 years. I got enough one-day chips to play a game of poker with, right? I'm great at quitting drinking. But man, I got a couple little 1 months and one little over 3 months. I'm really bad at staying sober. Which tells me that my real problem is not stopping drinking. My real problem is living sober. And you know what I hadn't done in those 3.5 years? All 12 steps. I hadn't even done 4 out of the 12. I do 1, 2, 3, drink, 1, 2, 3, drink, 1, 2, 3. And that guy Tom tried to help me those whole 3.5 years. There were lots of people who tried to give me the truth, but I was young and strong and proud. And I would not surrender. And for men and women like me who would not surrender, alcohol will bring you to your knees, and you will stop drinking. Some of us stop in this life and some of us stop in the next, but you will stop drinking. On the front page of my big book, in the little blank page that's near the front there's a bunch of names written there of people who don't get to sit in these seats, but they've stopped drinking, right? And I don't want to forget that. June 22nd, 1990 was not a good day, not a bad day. It was just another day of the drunk and another day of the hopeless drunk. My grandfather got me out of jail that morning. I was locked up for assault and battery in Baltimore City the night before. I lived out in the county, but man, when I would get drunk, I was attracted to the city, man, like the moth to the flame, right? And I'd get up there and I'd run around them bars and close them down and get in fights and wind up all over the place up there. And that night I got in a fight in front of a Baltimore City police officer, and they threw me in the paddy wagon and locked my butt up. And my grandfather came and got me out of jail the next morning. And, on the ride back, I couldn't even look at him in the eye. You know how you can't even look at me. I thought I should, promise it's going to be different or say I'm done. But he knew and I knew that wasn't the case. I just couldn't wait to get another drink because the voices in my head were just screaming at me, and my body was screaming at me that I desperately needed another drink. And as soon as I could, I got away from him, started drinking about noon that day, closed the bars down that night. And it wasn't a good night, it wasn't a bad night of drinking go. But leaving the bar, got in a fight with a guy over who was going to sit in the front seat of the car on the way home from the bar. I mean, it's something really important to die over, especially when you're young and strong and proud, You can't have somebody taking shotgun when you called it, right? I mean, you just can't have that happen. You got to let them know who you are. And this guy, Gene, and I got into it, and I started it. And I don't think Gene meant for this to happen. And I just drove by where this happened the other day, and I Sure enough, it was exactly the way I remember it. In Baltimore City, Lombard Street runs just a couple blocks from the Inner Harbor, the nicely developed section of Inner Harbor. There used to be some nightclubs there. And there's a whole little area that's restaurants and nightclubs there, and there's a parking garage right there. And you know how parking garages are, right? You got floors, right? And usually tend to have, like, you know, on the higher floors there'll be a wall, so the cars don't go out off over the parking lot. But then there'll be a big open space. And so me and Gene got in this fight over who's in front seat of the car on the way from the bar, and Gene tackled me. And I don't think Gene meant for this to happen, just the way it played out. Well, when Gene tackled me, I was right behind one of those big, you know, we were only on the second floor, thank God, or I probably wouldn't be here tonight. We were on the second floor of the parking garage, and when Gene tackled me, I went over top of that wall, out through that window, and fell 20 feet and landed on my head on the sidewalk on Lombard Street. And I literally just drove by the other day, and I could see right where I was. I mean, you know, I could see there's that second floor hole, and sure enough, it's about 20 feet, and that's right there where they got me. And it caved the whole side of my head in, cracked my skull from one side to the other. If you get me in the light, you'll see that my bald head now is full of pock marks. I got a ridge that runs from here all the way around the other. Matter of fact, I've noticed recently, and I lost all my hair and shaved a little I had off, is that my hats don't stay straight. They kind of tilt off to the side. Like, I'll have it straight, and then I'll turn, and 5-10 minutes later, because my head's kind of a little crooked, right? And by the time they got me to the hospital, I had nearly bled to death. Blood was coming out of my ears. Half my body had become paralyzed. Looked like I had a stroke, and I was covered in my own vomit. And the doctors told my family if I didn't die, I'd be brain dead. I was 22 years old. Early hours of the morning of June 23rd, 1990, and it's over. And I know it's over. I told you, man, I was a bright light, fast car, kind of drinker, right? And I had been to the hospital a lot getting patched back up. By the time I was 20, I had been shot at, I've been stabbed, I've been in more than 100-mile-an-hour car accident. I had been put back together a bunch of times in the hospital. This time it's different. I could feel the life draining out of me, literally. And I knew it was over. And it was absolutely terrifying. It was cold and dark in a way that words can't put into, they really can't describe. And I would be conscious for a minute and out for an hour, and one of the first times I came to, my grandfather's holding my hand. And my father got killed in Vietnam, like I told you, and my mother's father, my grandfather, had really more or less become my father. And I loved and respected that man, more than words can say, and I broke his heart. I absolutely broke his heart. He was a man whose word meant something. He was a man whose name meant something. And he wasn't a wealthy man. He was just a solid man of good character and integrity. My grandmother was an amazing Christian woman who's one of those kind of women of faith who she didn't have to tell you about her God. You could feel it in the way that she loved you. And she treated everybody with such love, And these were the kind of people who taught me, who had such high hopes for me. And here I am, laying in a bed, 22 years old. Destroyed, my life having meant nothing, all the hopes and dreams gone, and the people that love me the most are watching me die. That's what alcoholism does in this guy's life, right? That's what hopelessness looks like. My eyes pop open, my grandfather's holding my hand, and I look at him, and I can feel the life draining out of me, and what he described back to me later is eyes of terror. I asked him, am I going to die? And his hand begins to shake in mine, and a tear runs down his cheek, and men like my grandfather don't cry. He wasn't from the crying generation. And I knew right there. And what I was told later is that, I looked up at the ceiling and I said, dear God, please help me. God, please help me. That 4-word prayer is probably the most sincere, humble prayer I've ever said before or since. It's a prayer of a dying man to a God that he doesn't believe will help him because he's too bad for God. That maybe, just maybe, in his mercy, he might find just a minute, just a moment, just maybe, he might give me one more chance, because this is not the life I was supposed to live. This is not the death I was supposed to die. I could feel it in my soul, and yet there I was, and it was over. And I told my eyes roll back in my head, and a couple hours later, I'm coming to again, and what I can hear is, I hear what turns out to be my grandmother's pastor praying the last rites over me, and what he's praying is he's saying, God, please find forgiveness for David's soul in the next life, for this life is over. Please, God, please welcome him home. Please give him peace. And that was a great man of God. He got out of his bed at probably 3 o'clock in the morning, drove to that hospital by 4 a.m. so he could pray on me. That was a man who had faith and was willing to take action to demonstrate his faith, that maybe, just maybe, he might help me. Based on his experience, he did what he could do. And what he could do was he knew it was over. The doctors had said it was over. His experience told him it was over. The best thing he had to offer me was maybe that God might find forgiveness in the next life. And as he's leaving, my eyes kind of finally come all the way open. And there's Tom. My first response, Tom, he's like right there in the room. And I'm thinking, where the hell did he come from? Am I imagining things? What's going on here? And when my eyes caught his eyes, there was a look of love and compassion that came into that man's eyes. It was as if God himself looked at me. Looked at a broken child of his who was in such pain and such darkness and such suffering that his heart broke for him. And Tom walked over to me and he reached down and he put his hand on my shoulder and he looked down at me with these eyes, and again, words fail me here, of great compassion, but yet great conviction. And he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, never has to be this way again, Dave. And that was the early hours in the morning of June 23rd, 1990, and I've never had a day as dark since, and I've never had a drink since. And I don't know, it's kind of beyond my spiritual pay grade why I got another chance and some don't. But I do believe there was something special that happened. That literally, what we have in Alcoholics Anonymous is the ability to transmit the grace of God from one drunk to another. And there has to be two things present for that to happen. One, there has to be a willing drunk who's willing to step out of their life and their comfort zone and reach out and carry the message. And there has to be a drunk so desperate and so hopeless that they're willing to hear it. And both of those ingredients were present in the early hours of the morning of June 23rd, 1990. And I believe that was the spark that was to give me the hope and the willingness upon which this foundation and this amazing life that you all have blessed me with, and AA has blessed me with, and God has blessed me with, has been built on. Now, I didn't get the Bill Wilson mountaintop experience. My room didn't light up with a big glow, right? I didn't get the cool breeze blowing through my chest like Bill got. But I didn't die. And a time didn't just come at one time, right? Like the next day, I'm like, they're still thinking I'm going to die, right? I'm still bleeding out my ears. They're still kind of wondering, right? They didn't know a lot about traumatic brain injury back then. MRIs were kind of a newer thing, right? And so they didn't really, it was just kind of, let's see what happens, right? Let's see what happens. He'll either die or he won't. He'll either be brain dead or he won't. I'm still paralyzed. I look like I've had a stroke. And the next day, you all show up again. Tom brought people with him this time. And, I'm not naive enough to think that, that there wasn't a little bit of secret motive of, hey, you remember that guy who was stuck on his fourth step? Remember that young and strong and proud guy? Let's go see him. Let's go have a look. My buddy Winslow talks about that. He got on his fifth step pretty quickly after that visit to me in the hospital. But he came back day after day, sometimes multiple times a day. Into the hospital. I never asked you once to come. We got a responsibility pledge around here that says, whenever anyone asks for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I'm responsible. When anyone anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there for that. I am responsible. I didn't even ask you and you came. I don't know that I asked you once to come to the hospital and you came and you came and you came. And I don't ever want to forget that. How fortunate I was to be carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous when I didn't even ask for it. Right? And you all would show up, and for maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes after you would leave, there would be just a little spark of hope in my mind that maybe, just maybe, this might be my time, that maybe, just maybe, if I live through this, that maybe, just maybe, this might work for me. Because you all seem so sure it would. You all seem so sure it would. And then, that would fade, and then the craziness would start, and oh no, you're going to drink again. As soon as you get out of here, as soon as you can get out of this bed, and it's never worked before, and you're no good, and look what you've done to yourself now. What kind of life would you have anyway? And you're probably going to die anyhow, right? And then you come back again, and maybe I'd get an extra 5 minutes, right? And that went on for day after day, week after week. And then I was in there 3 weeks or so, and then they sent me home, and by now they figure I'm not going to die, right? And I'm brain damaged, but not brain dead. I know who I am. I know where I am. I'm paralyzed. They don't know if that's ever going to change. I'm having some seizures. I'm definitely not, definitely not 100%. Not even probably 50, right? But I'm alive. And they send me home because I'm stable now, right? I'm not home 2 hours and you all show up at my front door. Alcoholics Anonymous brought a meeting in my house. Hour 2 of me arriving home. And 4 men sat at my dining room table in my grandparents' house, right? And I could see the look in their eyes. I could see that sparkle in their eyes. And not all of them were sober forever like my sponsor. My sponsor was sober 9 years. That was an eternity. But there was Winslow S. There was Jim S. You know, there was Jerry N. Those guys had between 3 and 9 months of sobriety, right? And I thought, I've had more than 3 months before. I wasn't doing this kind of thing. I didn't have eyes like Jared, right? Winslow just did his 5th step. Look at him, man. I never did the 5th step. I had as much time as he has, but I never did those steps. Maybe, just maybe, they're right and I'm wrong. Maybe, just maybe, this thing will work if I do what they've done. And I began to move on forward to the steps, and those guys drug me around the meetings. One of the first meetings they took me to was a meeting in Columbia, Maryland, a place called the Alano Club. And I was sitting in the back like I always, like they kind of just set me down. I couldn't really get around really well, so they kind of helped me to my seat, and then they just kind of set me there, right? And somebody would bring me a cup of coffee, half a cup of coffee, because I was kind of a little shaky and paralyzed and a mess. And everybody would usually look at me when I sat down, and my sponsor would kind of beam, like, yeah, that's what'll happen to you drink again. That's, take advantage of the example, right? And was his motto. And at the end of the meeting, they had a coffee can, one of these 1 pound Maxwell House coffee cans. It was full of aluminum 1-day chips. And they said, if anybody want a 1-day chip? And I hadn't gotten one yet since I had a few weeks, maybe a month at that time. And I had so many of them. I waited till everybody used to smoke then, so they all ran out of the room. And there wasn't big vape clouds, it was just cigarettes then. Just run out there, and it was just me in the room. They kind of forgot me, really, I think, right, And I managed to get myself up, and I went over and I reached into that coffee can and I pulled out a 24-hour chip. And I looked at it, and this kind of awareness came to me. And I said it out loud. I said, well, God, one way or another, this is the last one of these I'll ever get. Last 24-hour chip I'll ever get. And I carried that chip with me for 2 years. And I carried it with me until I rubbed 24 hours off. And a couple years ago, my 3rd edition big book had gotten so beat up, I had to actually get one of these leather covers to actually put on it so it doesn't fall apart. And it's got a little spot for a chip. And I don't care about a 28-year chip in there. What I care about is that 24-hour limit chip. I never want to forget. I never want to forget that day. I never want to forget that's the last one of those I ever get, one way or another. And I get to decide every day, what action am I going to take to either stay on the path of Alcoholics Anonymous and continue this amazing life you've built in and through me with your love and the power that lies here, or I can go the other way to the darkness, and I can add my name to the names that I have in the front of my big book. Right? I get to choose every day. What will I do? What action will I take with God's help? And the day I chose to be here with you. So what's happened? Step 1, 2, and 3 were not hard for me. I told you what I stayed paralyzed for 3.5 years. For 3.5 months. It was pretty obvious I was paralyzed over alcohol. It was pretty obvious my life was unmanageable. Coming to believe the bridge between step 1 and 3 was always you. It was always you all. It was always the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. The reason I kept coming back here was because you all showed me that there was hope here, and I kept coming back just hoping maybe I'd get it. And in step 3, it was just simply a decision to go on with the rest of the steps. I didn't wait for the burning bush this time. I just had to get on with it. My sponsor immediately got me on a 4th and 5th step. I was probably sober about 3 months when I did that at the first spiritual retreat I'd ever went to. And it was on the shores of the Severn River, not far from where I live now. I often get a chance to kind of ride by it today, right looking the U.S. Naval Academy there. It's a beautiful setting. And on the shore of the Severn River, I got done telling this little Irish guy who was 40 years older than me exactly who and what I was. And it wasn't pretty. And at the end of it all, I couldn't look at him. And there were tears just running down on my shoes. And I wasn't much of an emotional guy or a crier then. You can see that's changed a lot, I've probably almost dropped 3 or 4 tears since I've been here talking to you. And But I wasn't at the time, and I couldn't even look at him. I was so ashamed of the man that I was. And that guy reached up and he grabbed me around my shoulders and he pulled me down and he said, Dave, I love you a great deal, and so does God. And he said, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, son. You may never have to drink again. And I didn't have the mountaintop experience leaving that fifth step that moment. But I knew somehow my AA roots had grasped new soil. I knew there was something that was changed. I knew there was some kind of new footing that I had found. And that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe I never had to drink again. And that old crazy woman, Virginia, remember I was telling you about her woman who grabbed me? She was at that retreat. And she saw me after that. And she shared with me her experience on the fifth step. And she said, oh, honey, I'm so glad you did the fifth step. She said, that fifth step, she said, it de-unique to me. She said, I couldn't get the first word of the first step, we, until I did step 5. And I told another alcoholic exactly who and what I was, and they loved me and they didn't judge me. She said, then I knew that I belonged. And belonging is such a powerful, powerful force. We as human beings, we crave, things like, having security and shelter and food. This guy Maslow had this hierarchy of needs, this pyramid of needs, and in the middle of that is belonging, right? It's hard for us to really develop into the human beings that God intends us to be if we don't feel like we belong. If we don't feel like we can be our authentic selves to at least a small group of people. People will never feel like they fit, right? Like I did before I came to AA. And some research recently has said that actually people will put belonging below food and shelter and their own safety. If they feel like they belong to a group, that they will risk everything for that group, right? And that's been the case in Alcoholics Anonymous for me. Once I felt like I belonged, it felt like nothing else mattered. It felt like I'd found my people, and I fit, finally. After all of my life, I found where I belong. And I still feel that way almost 30 years later. And I started the path of sobriety. I did 6 and 7. I started on 8 and 9. And what I found out with 8 and 9 is, I went around and I made the list, and I tried to tell the people who I'd hurt the most, what I was about and what I was trying. It wasn't an I'm sorry. It wasn't a mumbled apology. It was, I'm on this path, and I'm really trying to make things right, and I know I've hurt you, and I want to make that right. And of course, the people that love me would just stay on that path. Like, you stay on that path. Like my grandparents who were with me through the worst of my drinking watched me die and then saw the transformation and recovery in that first year. First year was amazing. We were talking about one of our buddies here is coming up on, he's 11 months now, right? And I remember that first year, man, there was horrible, horrific things like I'm paralyzed and may never get unparalyzed. I'm on 3 different probations, right? I've got 3 different court dates where I could go to jail for a long time on any one of them, right? But I've also had this amazing transformation, right? I'm like 3 months sober and I get unparalyzed. I go to a neurologist one day and he throws 2 MRIs up on the board and he looks baffled, and these are the kind of things that happen, and I watch him go back and forth, and I'd go every 2 weeks and he'd take a picture and he'd go, you're going to be paralyzed, you're going to look like you've had a stroke, you're just going to be this way for 3 months, it's not going to change. And this guy looks at me with a baffled look and he says, Dave, I said, I can't explain it, but your brain's been rebuilt in 2 weeks. And he said this to me, which I thought was very strange, but I knew it wasn't really from him. He said, whatever you're doing, son, keep doing it. And I knew what I was doing. I was doing AA. And I knew somehow that maybe this God that you all talked about might actually care enough about me to come into my life and make these changes happen. And like I said, it's above my spiritual pay grade to explain why I'm supposed to be dead and I'm not, right? Why, I got 95% restored in 2 weeks and others don't, right? But I know who did it. I'm not under any delusion about there was a power that came in for whatever reason that transformed my life and showed to me what he can do through you. So in that first year, I'm unparalyzed. I've made the amends. I'm trying to live in 10, 11, and 12. I'm starting to read things that I never would have imagined me reading before. I'm getting back to some of the faith that I had as a child, not in a kind of really rigid kind of way, but just in an open-minded kind of way that, hey, maybe that God that I had, that actually I thought actually did kind of love me as a kid. I was fortunate. I had kind of a loving God, that maybe I'm not too bad for him after all. Because I shared with Tom exactly who and what I was. And he's a human being. And he didn't judge me. He loved me. Maybe God could too. Right? When I got unparalyzed, it's kind of like, now what do I do with my life? And my sponsor said, weren't you in college? And I said, yeah, Tom. He said, why don't you go back? So I went back to college. Absolutely convinced I'm going to fail. And what I learned is that what Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me how to do with my drinking works in every other area of life. I showed up at that college. I went to classes when I was supposed to. I got there early. I stayed late. I found a group of winners. I brought more to that group than I tried to take from it. And lo and behold, man, I got through the first semester and I was on the dean's list. And I'm like, wow, this has never happened before. That's a fluke. Next semester, I'm probably going to fail out, right? And then I did it all again. And next semester, I didn't fail out. And then I'm in the National Engineering Honor Society, and they want to have a big ceremony, and I get to go down, and the people who watched me die in the hospital a year before, my grandparents, my parents, right? They get to be part of this. In a year, right? I celebrate my first year. There's 14 members of my family sitting in the front row with tears of pride and joy in their eyes instead of tears of pain and disgust. Man, if you're in your first year, don't miss that. Man, grab yourself one of these people who raised their hand and said they're willing to sponsor you, man, and do those steps. Man, don't miss it. Don't cut yourself off from the people that you love for that. It's transformative, right? Oh, and then there's 1 to 5. Because now we got sobriety, right? So if you all are in that sort of 1 to 5 range, we're going to talk to you now. I was about 2 years sober, and I was desperately looking for her. College was going well enough that I had me a good little internship, making some money. Went out and bought myself a freaking Corvette, right? Got myself a Corvette, a fast motorcycle, and on the Corvette, I got, my last name's Doss, and we can bleep this out if you want, but it says Doss Man on the tag, right? I got the blonde mullet going again. I've been back at the gym working out, right? I got it now. I'm Mr. Sober, man. I'm working steps, sponsoring people, going to a zillion meetings a week. But I'm dying on the inside a little bit now, right? Because I'm doing the outside stuff, but the inside stuff isn't changing. And I find myself one night, I wound up having a girlfriend that, one of those early AA romances that we both chose poorly, and she went back out again, and a lot of bad stuff happened to this girl. And it really freaking wrecked me, and it wrecked her, right? One of my best friends went back out, and a lot of bad stuff happened to him. And all of a sudden, I'm going, man. And about that time, I bump into one of my old friends that says, hey, I'm getting married. We're having the bachelor party. You want to come? Sure, I'll come. And then I get on the bus, and it's all the old high school friends. And it looks so fun, man. They're drinking. Man, we're telling old war stories, man. Ain't nobody getting locked up, right? They're looking good, And all of a sudden it hits me. I'm gonna drink like now. And I didn't see it coming because I'm Mr. AA. How can I drink? I just went to a meeting like 4. I'm sponsoring like 10 people, right? And the only thing that saved me was I said a prayer. I realized, and I said, God, if you don't want me to drink, man, you gotta intervene here. I'll freaking run screaming off this bus if I have to, but you show me. And we're picking up people along the way, and guy gets on the bus. Turns out it's my friend's new brother, going to be his new brother-in-law. Well, his new brother-in-law is the guy that I used to sponsor in AA. And I didn't know he was his brother-in-law. As soon as the guy gets on the bus, my eyes catch his, and he's got a beer in his hand, and he looks down and he sees I got a soda in mine. And I'm like, oh yeah. God just sent you to me, man. God just sent you, because I am not going to let this guy, I am not going to be the example that AA doesn't work to this guy. And I didn't drink that night. Right? But what it showed me was that, I had some priorities out of order, right? I had without knowing it, I had put in relationships, right? I had put school and making money, right? And while I was still doing some of the work in AA, my heart wasn't in it the way it was. It didn't have the priority and the force that it did that first year. and I almost drank again, you know. And so I doubled down in AA. I got back on track, right? You know, I learned a few things about putting myself in situations like that, right? And that I shouldn't be putting myself in situations like that unless I'm on firm spiritual ground, and that I don't get to decide if I'm on firm spiritual ground. I got to call my sponsor up and ask for permission, right? That's what the deal that we had, because I'd almost lost it. I'd almost lost the precious gift that quickly. You know, a year, 14 people crying in the front row, amazing, tears in my eye. I mean, just at 2 inches and seconds away from taking a drink without God's intervention, right? And that started, you know, a period of, you know, sort of through the end. You know, I did meet her, my wife April. We wound up getting married. By the time I was 5 years sober, it was right about the time we got married. My wife's sober about 2 years. I was sober about 6 at the time, 5, 6 when we met, and we started down this path together. My wife's just an amazing example of Alcoholics Anonymous. My wife April, if any of y'all ever come across her, and we've been on this path together. And I remember when we started getting together, you know, I was sober 4, she was sober 1, and we said, what's the odds? What's the odds both of us are going to stay sober the rest of our life? And we said, well, if you look statistically, it's pretty slim. But I tell you what, if you look at the AA literature, it says as long as we stay on the path, we're pretty much guaranteed. Rarely are we going to see a person fail. And we've been on the path together. We've been doing this thing, you know, wide open the whole time. And you know, we've had our challenges, man. You know, one of the things I think, you know, you get this image in your mind that marriage is going to be perfect. The people that you bring together in that marriage is going to be who you are. The rest are like, no. We change and we grow and we hurt and we suffer and we hit roadblocks and we have amazing achievements and all those things. It's life. And the people that my wife and I are today are not the people who got married almost 23 years ago. You know, but we've done what we've done in AA, and we put all our chips in. We went all in on marriage, just like all in on AA. We're not giving up. We're doing it. We're in this thing together. You know, yeah, we've had to go to counseling. Yep. So what? Guess what? Every now and then you need some marriage counseling. You need somebody, a third party, to intervene and say, all right, where are you guys? And it's usually the same thing. It's usually money and sex, right? Or how to raise your kids, right? And those were the same problems we were having, right? And sure enough, we sat down and talked with somebody, and we found out we weren't that far apart, and with a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of give and take, you know, and we've had an amazing life together, you know. I've got to be a dad to 2 amazing kids. My daughter's 21, my son's almost 18, you know, and I didn't do that well. I had to grow up fast when our kids were born. I didn't realize how self-centered I was until I had a little crying baby, right? And I didn't do it well. And my wife will tell you, you know, she was a little worried about whether or not I was going to make it as a father, right? Because it was a hard adjustment. But I tell you what, I made it, you know. I was able to finish that college degree. I was able not only to finish a bachelor's degree, first guy in my family to get one, right? And that's not really about me. That's about the generations before that made it possible, and about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got a chance to go back to that university that I was on academic probation. One of the probations I was on when I got sober. I was on academic probation, and that university eventually awarded me a PhD in engineering, right? Because you all taught me how to show up consistently, not brilliantly, but consistently. There's a lot of power in consistency, my first sponsor, Tom, used to say. You know, just showing up over and over and over again, just doing the best you can. When you fail, you show up, you show up, you show up. You get yourself back up, you go to a meeting, you share with your sponsor, right? If you've hurt somebody, you make amends, you turn to God, you get back on it. You never leave. And I thank God that I don't want to leave. I thank God that you all still inspire me. I was at a meeting in my home group last night, and a woman that I've known for 26 years shared last night. And I can remember seeing her walk in, and the wreck that she was, and the amazing woman I heard share last night. Inspires me, man. I love being here. This is the stuff. There ain't nothing like it. That's what she said last night. There is nothing like AA that she's experienced, and she's experienced a lot. I'm telling you, I've lived in foreign countries. You know, I've sat in rooms with the people that shaped this nation, with generals that have 4 stars on their shoulders. None of that stuff matters, man. You know, I've seen the highest mountains. I swam in the deepest seas. I've seen the damn world. I've been on 5 continents and 40 countries. No place I'd rather be than with you tonight. No place. Because I love Alcoholics Anonymous. And all those things I just named, that's just the side benefits of having a chance to be here with you and walk on this amazing path. So I know I'm out of time. I'll share with you a couple precious moments, and then I'll kind of wrap up. I talked to you a little bit about, you know, my children. And some of the greatest blessings I've had, you know, as I sort of think about the big pivotal moments, I think about things like, even before we had kids, my grandfather was the best man at my wedding. And I'm trying to get a look at my wife coming down the aisle in this little stone church not far from where we live now. And I feel his hand on my shoulder, and it's my grandfather. And I turn and look at him, I've only seen him cry 3 times in his whole life. He didn't even cry when he died. Once when he buried his mom, once when he watched me die, and that day that he was my best man. I watched a tear run down his cheek, and he told me how honored he was that I chose him to be my best man. I said, there's nobody else. There is nobody else. There is no better man, right? I carry with me something, I won't go into it, but I had a chance to live in England for a couple years for work, and I got to experience AA in a whole nother country and all that. And one of the things I love is, in England they have a £2 coin, and on the edge of it, and it's a little bit smaller than an AA chip. This is about how big it is. It's worth about $3. And on the edge of it, there's a quote that says, "Standing on the shoulders of giants." And I thought, I kind of like that quote. I wonder where it comes from. And I looked it up, and it turns out it comes from Isaac Newton. And the quote goes like this: "If I have seen further or accomplished more than ordinary men, it is only because I have stood on the shoulders of giants." And when I think about the life that I've been blessed to live, and I would like to think that, it has been an extraordinary life compared to what I brought to you all. But I think about the giants whose shoulders I stood on to be able to have this life. Giants like my grandfather and grandmother, my mom. Giants like my sponsor, Tom, and my sponsor in the UK, Martin, and my sponsor today, Stu B. The giants of all the men and a few women that I've had the benefit to sponsor over the years, and who have taught me far more than I have ever taught or given them, right? I think about being there to watch my children be born. My daughter, first, and the doctor looking at me with wonder in his eyes going, "Isn't it beautiful, David?" And me thinking, you have no idea. A guy like me is not supposed to have it. It's not supposed to be in a place like this, having this happen to me. And, it's one of those sort of birthing suites, and everybody's around, the grandparents are in there, the parents are in there. It was like, 15 people in there. My poor wife's trying to give birth, And I hold that little girl in my arms, And it changed me. It changed me in a way that it still carries forward to this day, And I got to hug her before I walked out the door tonight. And she's 21 and she's beautiful, and she's got a big heart like her dad. She looks a little more like me than her mom, but she carries it a lot better. And got a lot more hair, thank God. And a couple years later, my son came along, and he's a whole different breed. He's all boy. He couldn't even come out the ordinary way. They had to cut him out, and he burst out like an alien out of her mom's belly, and he's all ready to go, and he's been kind of that way since. And he wiggled around in my arms, almost dropped him, and it's kind of been that sort of battle between he and I ever since, because we're a couple guys who each kind of went our own way, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But you know what? I've got a chance to see the principles that you've taught me, the things that my grandfather taught me about how to be a man, right? I've tried to live those in our home. And he's old enough now I can talk to him about what it means to be a man. And when I hear my own words come back out of his mouth, it's pretty powerful. It's pretty cool to see your kids reflect back the principles that you've tried to teach and show them for decades as their own. And there's probably, truthfully, no greater gift that AA has given me than that, right? And I've got to watch them grow up. I've got to have the 4 fingers wrapped around one at the daddy-daughter dance. Precious, precious. I remember turning my son loose on his bike the first time and watching him fall over and get scraped up and try to go crying to his mom and convincing him that no, he has to get back on the bike until he makes it. And he did. I've been at every birthday, every graduation, and there's a zillion graduations these days. We graduate from nursery school, we graduate from 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, right? But then I've gotten a chance to be at the graduations, where the daughter walks across the high school stage, right? And she's got the white gown on, and I think, my God, where did the years go? And this flood of memories of of her being little and that daddy-daughter dance and holding her hand and her first smile and the snowball battles with my son in the Colosseum in Rome and living and experience, 1,000-year-old cathedrals in England and swimming with whale sharks in the Caribbean and her 11th birthday on the shores of Normandy where one of my sponsees was getting married and told me to bring my daughter because it was her birthday. I mean, these kind of things, I could spend a whole hour sharing with you just these amazing, amazing memories and examples. And I used to hate people like me when I was new. If I was one of these people in the 1 year, I would hate me right now because I'd be absolutely sure it would never happen to me. And I'm telling you, man, whatever your hopes and dreams are, and I don't know what it is that God has in store for you, and I don't know what those hopes and dreams are, but I tell you what, man, Alcoholics Anonymous has not only given me the ability to see dreams come true, important dreams, like getting a chance to be the kind of father I wish I would have had to my children come true, right? Being a guy who's able to stay sober day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, and try to be there when someone walks through the door to reach out your hand and say, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, man. It never has to be that way again. Hope is available here, right? So I'll close with this story. My wife and I, and it's kind of my wife's story, but I was there, so I'm going to steal it tonight. She might come up here and tell it again at some point. You never know. But we lived in England for a couple years. Got to go there for work. I was 19 years sober. Dug in quick to AA there because I knew I was going to die if I didn't. Within 2 weeks, I had a sponsor, sponsoring a guy, and had a home group, and had an amazing experience of small town AA, and the same stuff that I had found almost 20 years before, 4,000 miles away, works in Cheltenham, England. Guarantee it. So one of the field trips we did was to Winchester Cathedral. And so some of you may know from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson had a visit to Winchester Cathedral. And there's the tombstone of the Hampshire Grenadier who caught his death drinking small cold beer, right? So we had to find the tombstone, right? And so there's a cemetery out back of the cathedral, and we thought it was there, and we wandered around. Of course, I wasn't going to ask for help. Eventually, my wife asked for help, and they go, oh, no, there's a couple tombstones out front. If you go out there, you'll see it. And as we're standing there looking at that tombstone, the front of the cathedral, which is the west wall, there's this huge stained glass window. And if you've ever seen a picture of, any big cathedrals, big churches, they often have these gigantic stained glass windows. And this one was different. It looked modern. It was like it was like this weird eclectic mix of glass. It looked kind of like Art Deco-y, almost like something Frank Lloyd Wright would have, right? It didn't look like there wasn't any biblical scenes. And my wife's a history buff, so she had to find out what's up with this window, right? So she goes up and she reads, says, come over here and read this. And sure enough, like in the 1500s, the window had been blown out in one of England's civil wars. They had an awful lot of them by cannon fire, and the townspeople could not afford to have the glass made in Italy and sent back. But what they had was they had a master craftsman there, and what they did is they collected all the shards of glass, and that guy spent his life taking the broken pieces of glass, much like us. Remember when I talked about scrap heap of humanity? Right? You find this broken piece of sharp glass. I mean, you got to be careful you don't cut yourself with it. You don't think, man, I'm going to build something amazing out of this. You think I'm going to throw that thing away before I cut myself, right? But what this guy did over his lifetime is he'd take that piece of broken glass and he'd polish off the rough edges a little bit, and he'd take and he'd wrap it in lead. And then he'd find another piece of glass that kind of fit, and he'd sand that one down and put that together, and over a period of decades, he rebuilt this 40-foot by 80-foot stained glass window. Go home, Google it, Winchester Cathedral, west wall window, and you'll see it. And sure enough, it's this crazy mosaic of this amazing color. And if you look closely, you're like, oh yeah, there's a little broken piece of glass, but you look at it, it's beautiful. I think that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is, right? I feel like all I am is one of these little shards of glass, right? And if you'd have seen me on June 23rd, 1990, you just said, man, that thing, best is to throw that away before you cut yourself with it, right? But what you all did, and what God seems to do, is you kind of help polish the rough edges. And then you all come along and we tend to find the pieces that fit with us if we're willing to sponsor and we're willing to work with others. And all of a sudden, over a period of days and weeks and months and decades, there's a fellowship that's pieced together from this broken glass into the beautiful scene that I see here tonight. Thoreau said most men live lives of quiet desperation. They go to their grave with their song still in their heart. And I tell you, when I heard that quote in sobriety, I thought, oh God, don't let that be me. And so one of the things that I think is sort of my path is to do things like this, to sing my song, that there's hope here, that Alcoholics Anonymous works, and that there is a life beyond your wildest dreams here, right? So thank you for having me, and thank you for your love, and thank you for the program.
Thank you, Dave, for coming here and sharing that incredibly powerful message. I know we're right up against it. If you want to do some service work, we could always use help cleaning up after the meeting. It's customary for us to form a line and thank our speakers. They come here on their own time and expense to come and share a message with us. And if you care to join us, we have a nice way of closing.